welcome back to the second episode of IVY Unfiltered. I am Vidal, as always, with my big brother, Beri.
So good to be back here. I absolutely loved the first episode. It was probably the first time either of us expressed so many opinions publicly that got actually recorded. Excited to double down on it today. We're going to be reflecting on 5 of the latest interviews at IVY. So we'll kick off with discussing Master of Change, how to excel when everything is changing, based on the key learnings from Brad Stulberg. Then we're going to go to Burn the Boats, how to toss Plan B overboard to unleash your potential with Matt Higgins. From there, unleashing your potential, transformative lessons from a 5-time world record holder, Annabelle Williams. And we're going to round this out with 2 final reflections. One on All Pride, No Ego, a queer executive's journey to living and leading authentically. And we'll finish up with the hook point, how to stand out in a 3-second world, with the key learnings from Brendan Kane. So lots to cover here. And at IVY, we now do a brand new interview and share the key learnings every single workday, so 5 a week. For anyone who wants to go deeper on anything that we discussed today, all of it is available to you on ivy.com. And if you ever want to exchange these learnings with your teams, your loved ones, you want to bring it into conferences and offsites you organize, we're happy to help you with anything. So just email either one of us and we'll be happy to support you with that. So getting started, Master of Change, Brad Stulberg. Vidal, what was your key resonation when you listened to this interview?
Wow. I mean, first of all, as you just listed all the titles, Beri, I thought, was this 1 week? There's certainly a dense amount of value. And I think we could have probably spent a whole week and a whole episode today talking about Brad and Master of Change. The overall thesis is about embracing change. I think, first of all, one thing that stuck out to me was a term that he used, that he introduced. First, he introduced the concept of homeostasis, which I remember from back in high school biology. It's the concept that our bodies live in homeostasis. We want the planet to live in homeostasis. This is when the systems, many complex systems, despite living in relative chaos, they all come together and work together and balance each other out in an equilibrium. And we want to look, I think we all feel like we want an internal homeostasis. We want our work and our life and our motivation to be in this homeostatic state. And what Brad introduces is this idea of allostasis. I didn't know what that meant, but the idea is basically, instead of looking for that balance and equilibrium, it's about accepting and even seeking change, because it's through change that we develop. So I thought that was really interesting, because there is clearly, I definitely have a bias towards finding that balance, towards finding a homeostasis, because I think, oh my God, I need to find balance. Like, I'm all over the place. But in fact, accepting this concept of allostasis is really interesting. One other point that I'll just bring up, there were so many good learnings from Brad, so it's really hard to summarize so in one point. But one statement that really resonated with me is this concept, and this isn't Brad's thought, he just brought it up as to introduce one of his frameworks, and it's this idea that our happiness and mood at any given moment is defined by the gap between our expectations and reality. And the importance is to really set our expectations accordingly. So it's not about finding the homeostasis. It's not even necessarily about accepting change. It's about intelligently creating expectation, and then we will find fulfillment, because we can reduce the gap between our expectations and reality while still setting a really high bar for ourselves.
So building on that, when I hear people say things like, well, manage your expectations and, want less and you'll be happier. While on the one hand, it makes sense to me, it also often rubs me the wrong way, because I think to myself, well, if that's how the highest achieving people in the world, if they just set a lower bar for themselves, then this world would be a much worse place than it is right now. So it's been a lifelong struggle for me to figure out how to kind of marry the advice of be happy with what you have instead of seeking happiness elsewhere, with the critical importance of striving for more. So one thing that Brad said that helped me reconcile this internal conflict that I have, he said, when it comes to the things you can control, that are down to you, set your expectations sky high. Everything that you have agency over, that you are the prime mover, then yeah, go as set the highest expectations that you
Yeah.
possibly can. At the same time, when it comes to your expectations of external results, you have to almost cultivate a mindset of being somewhat indifferent, in the sense of like, as long as you're giving your very, very best in the inputs you control, then sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but your happiness can't be just tied to the outcome, because the outcome also involves, 8 billion people in the world and everything else, all the
Yeah.
other forces at play. So I thought that was a really good one. The other thing that I'm observing a lot with all the 10,000 plus CEOs we work with, the 300,000 plus business leaders across the world, uh, so many people expected that after the madness of COVID and that crazy amount of change, things would somehow come back to normal. And that's what Brad refers to as homeostasis: is there is order, then there's disorder, and then you get back to order. And allostasis, as you were alluding to, is instead of going from order, disorder to order, it's more about order, disorder, and then reorder.
Hmm.
And even though it's been now a couple years since the worst of the lockdowns, a lot of people are just trying to get back to order. And what Brad is saying is like, stop it. Stop trying to get back to what you had, to the order you used to have. Really look to optimize the reorder, the new reality, and how you want to define it. And for many business owners, we have those incredible high times where we're like top of the world, all the numbers are going in our direction. And then anyone who's in business for more than a couple of years, then there's low times and bad times. And we wish to get back to, remember when we were just crushing it all the
Hmm.
time and we didn't have these challenges? And what Brad made me really think about is that stop trying to get back to the highs. Those highs will never come back the way you had them back then. It was a different company you were running, and it was a different world you were running it in. Look instead to create reorder. What's a new kind of high that you could have never had in the past that you can have now in this new environment? Final thought from Brad that I thought was super moving is having this multifaceted personality and identity to help navigate changes. He gave this example of like, imagine you have a house with just one room, and if that room is a mess, then your whole life is a mess. But if you have a house with multiple rooms, if you have, and as an analog to your
Hmm.
identity, if your identity is about one thing, like your work, and if your work is a mess, then your life is a mess, not great. But if, like a multi room house, if one or two rooms are a complete mess, but five or six other rooms are actually quite tidy and pleasant, then your ability to kind of navigate through life is going to be stronger. So, how can we make sure that our life doesn't have just one dimension? And for a lot of people in our audience, that's likely going to be work. But even if it's work and family, what else can be there? And what I did during COVID, even though I was working harder than ever, I decided, you know what, this is a good reminder that my health is actually really important, and I'm just going to sign up to a triathlon. And I had never
Hmm.
run a race before. And if you looked at me when I signed up for this triathlon, you would think, hey, maybe you should, maybe start with like a 5K run. But I like the idea that, like, whoa, if I do this, I'll be a triathlete. And that's not who I am right now. And it was intense enough and exciting enough. And it created a whole new room in my house of life. And it gave me so much happiness and joy. And even for my work and my personal relationships, there was another aspect to me that was interesting to other people, that was interesting for me also to talk about. So that multidimensionality, I found, was an incredibly powerful force.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, congrats on being a triathlete, one-time triathlete. And I do recall, as you were training for the triathlon, one of your close friends, who shall remain nameless, actually told me, "Hey, I'm properly concerned that Beri might die during this triathlon." You certainly proved him wrong. I think he knows who he is when he's listening to this. But well done on that. I also wanted to reflect on this concept of order, disorder, and reorder. What it makes me think of, we're both watching Foundation now. I'm a big fan of the books as well. And Isaac Asimov wrote this incredible story called The Last Question. And the last question was, how can entropy be reversed? And it was asked to a superhuman AI. Maybe we can get into the last question on another episode. But what it made me think of is the concept of entropy. And the reality is, from the most micro to the most macro. So, micro being ourselves, or even smaller atoms and cells within ourselves, it's in a constant state of flux and entropy. Those systems are always getting more and more chaotic, and within ourselves, there's constant entropy. And that entropy, how does it manifest? A lot of things stay. Potentially, it seems like they stay the same throughout the course of our lives, but actually, it's not really staying the same. It is a concept of order, disorder, reorder, and that's growth. And in some of the other modules that we're going to talk about, in the thought leaders ideas we're going to talk about, this is going to come back again and again, what that process of growth is. But entropy is constant. As we get bigger within businesses, within countries, within the whole world and society, we're constantly going through the cycle of entropy where things are becoming more chaotic. But that is progress as well. Progress only happens through the process of entropy, because total homeostasis is stagnation. So in reality, we want to optimize for this. We want to seek this, but we want to also, as Brad said, keep our expectations in check about the things that we can and can't control, and try to focus on the things that we can control, and aim as sky high as we can possibly allow ourselves to, and really work hard at it. And then the rest, we got to expect some chaos, right? And ride the waves and expect change. And that's the whole theme. Change is going to happen whether you like it or not. So surrender to it and do what you can and work hard within that concept of change. So yeah, really love this one. I think it's a really great jumping off point for this week for the rest of the thought leaders we have to talk about.
One last thing I want to add to this before we move to our reflections on the next module is, someone might hear what you just said, Vidal, and be like, okay, that's cool, Vidal, Beri, super optimistic guys, but there's been change in my life that absolutely sucked. It was terrible, and it led to a decline. There was no growth. It sucked, and I think it's a little bullshit to just think, oh yeah, all change is good. This is, these guys are just like, drinking too much of the Kool-Aid. And I want us to also be realistic and recognize that not all change leads to positive growth. And there is decline, there is entropy, and there is also, negative destruction, whether it's at a personal level, organizational level, or societal level. So it is really important for us to think through that too, that it is actually high stakes. We're not going to be able to eliminate change. That's just not how the universe works, from the Big Bang till the whatever big expansion or big collapse, however the universe ends. There's constant change. We're all made of like these vibrating, subatomic particles, and they're constantly changing their configuration and so on and so forth. So if change is inevitable, and it's possible that it can lead to growth, but it can also lead to decline and diminishment, how do we actually navigate? Doesn't matter maybe how we feel and so forth. What's the best approach? And the last thing that I want to round out this particular reflection with is Brad's concept of rugged flexibility. So ruggedness and flexibility, like they can seem like kind of opposites. And what Brad recommends is be really rugged and strong and firm when it comes to your core values, when it comes to the things you most deeply believe in, what you really want to become, the impacts you want to have on the world and your loved ones, and so forth, and the kind of life you want to live, how you want to feel while living that life. Do not give that up. Be super rugged. At the same time, be super flexible and nimble when it comes to how you're going to get there, because the world is changing, you're changing, the people around you are changing. So if you're too firm and rugged in how you get there, you're not going to get there. But if you're very flexible in how you're willing to get there, but not ever abandoning the ruggedness you have on your core beliefs, you're much more likely to get there. So, and I do think that's a great jumping off point for our next module of the week, which is by Matt Higgins. And he wrote this incredible book called Burn the Boats: How to Toss Plan B Overboard to Unleash Your Full Potential. What were your most critical takeaways from this one, Vidal? And we'll build on it from there.
Yeah. First off, just to come back to your last point on Brad about, rugged flexibility, it reminded me of your conversation with Matthew McConaughey that's really stuck with me for years about life is like a multi-lane highway. And as long as you know where you're going, doesn't matter. You can weave in and out of those lanes as long as you're going in the general right direction and the same direction or the direction you want to go. So that true north is really important. That is also a super good segue to Matt Higgins. So Matt is really interesting, Beri. This concept I found very triggering. Folks, what we have here is a CEO, the CEO of Ivy and the COO of Ivy. CEOs and COOs are very similar, but they're also very different in many ways. So first off, let me tell you what this concept of burn the boats is. The concept of burn the boats refers back to ancient warfare when a naval power would invade a neighboring island or city-state or whatever. Think ancient Greece. The concept would be you'd get all your army onto the opposing island that you want to invade and conquer, and then you would burn your navy so that the army had no choice. If they want to survive, they better win the war. And okay, what has this got to do with our lives? What has this got to do with CEOs and COOs? This applies to everybody. I think it's just nice that in this conversation, what triggered me about this is Matt's idea is really counterintuitive. And the idea of burn the boats in our lives is about embracing plan A and not having a plan B. Plan A is the only option. And when plan A is the only option, how are you going to behave? Because Matt really worries that when we optimize too much for a plan B or we have too strong of a plan B, we're actually working to the detriment of plan A because we know plan A doesn't need to succeed. Now, COOs, plan B, plan C, plan D, E, F, that's your job. It feels like your life. Okay, you got to be ready for any possible outcome. And what I love about CEOs and what I've learned so much from the CEOs that I've worked with is they work in a zone of plan A. They actually have a very much a burn the boats mentality of like, we're going to put it all on the line for this. And perhaps that's where success really, really does come from this concept of metaphorically burning the boats and not having a plan B option. It's all about the plan A. Obviously, Matt, acknowledges the fact that there will be backup plans. Plan A may not succeed, but the idea is not having plan B be so prominent that it becomes a viable alternative option. It really needs to be a real downside scenario and an option that's undesirable, but ultimately leads to survival and whatever else you need to do. But plan A is the plan. That's the plan. You go for plan A. And this is interesting when we talk about rugged flexibility, the concept of embracing change. I think overall the messages dovetail with each other because the concept of plan B is an alternate plan, but plan A can also have that rugged flexibility that Brad was talking about. So curious to hear what you thought, Beri.
For me, I think this is one of the best advantages I've had in my whole life. And is this ability to deeply believe in something and go for it and have the staying power and the willpower when, you know, there might have been like 1,000+ reasons to quit at some point. The endeavor, I kept going. However, that doesn't mean that I did it perfectly the whole time. Uh, for me, it boils down. Now I realize I used to think plan A was, the endeavor that I'm pursuing. So in this case, Ivy, which I founded with my classmate Philip after business school, and which I graduated in 2010, so that was 13 years ago. Was when the beginnings of the endeavor started, and a part of me thought this is going to succeed no matter what happens, and I've never ever thought otherwise. And people often ask me, I think I must have been asked definitely hundreds, if not thousands of times, like, okay, but what if it doesn't work out? Like, what's your. And for me, it was just unthinkable. It's like, what do you mean? Like, I'm going to keep going no matter what happens. And of course, like any early stage venture that lasts more than the initial couple of years,
Hmm.
we had some incredible highs. We grew the organization. In our prior model, we were doing 1,000 events a year across 8 cities. And for 4 years in a row, we had doubled in revenue each year. And, everybody, it was seemed to be thriving from everyone's perspective. But inevitably, with that model, we did hit uh, business people have really great euphemisms. We got ahead of our skis, or we hit a bump on the road. These are great ways to like tone down. And it was a scary moment. One thing that we used to do to grow our community no longer worked, and that just put the whole model in jeopardy. And while dealing with and it took a couple years to turn that around. So it wasn't like, oh yeah, and then we
Mm.
figured something out and it was fine. It was really hard. It felt, really precarious for a couple years for sure. And during that time, I was very lucky to have my YPO, Young Presence Organization forum, where with a group of 7 guys, we meet once a month for 4 hours, kind of serves as a personal board of directors. And what they got me to see was that they got me to see that I'm seeing Ivy, the organization, as this big, really important thing that I need to keep together. And I'm this like small person trying to carry this big weight and make it work at all costs. And what they got me to see is that that's wrong. Beri, you're the big thing.
Mm.
You're the big thing. Ivy is one of your creations. And there's no way, like, what's important is you take care of yourself and you focus on your dreams. And then, one way or another, if you really want to achieve Ivy's mission, doesn't matter, you'll find a way to achieve its mission as long as like Beri keeps going. That's what's critical. And in a interesting way, all of a sudden, like that plan A definition of like it's the org that's most critical, it
Mm.
was actually transcending that. And it's like, no, it's the mission of the org, and it's the mission of the founder. And my as someone who cares so deeply about like how can we really maximize the ability of each person to dream bigger and achieve their full potential through learning, through connection, that's what's important. And as long as I'm like completely dedicated to that plan A, organizations change, business models change, every technology changes, the world keeps changing. But that's never going to change. The world is never
Mm.
going to not need connection and learning and growth and people trying to achieve their goals. So I think my key resonation, connecting this to Matt Higgins and Plan A, I think it's really important for each person to take a really thoughtful approach to what Plan A is. And I think that's really not just, the business goal or your, you know, your KPIs for the year. That's not Plan A, that you're going to stick with. Plan A is like, what makes you come alive? What is the kind of way in which you want to impact the world? How do you want to leave it different? How do you ideally want to leave it better than you
Mm.
found it? What's your approach towards doing that? And whatever your job may be, whatever the org may be, whatever may be happening in the world, are you getting better and better at that? Some other thought leader I'd interviewed, whose name will come to me maybe later, had also said, if an author only worries about, you know, plan A is the, write a bestseller, number one bestseller. Well, that's not a great plan A because sometimes things hit and you have a bestseller and sometimes they flop. The only question that should matter if you're an author is, am I becoming a better author? Even if the last one was a flop, did I learn from that I became a better author? And obviously, an author of what? Well, an author whose books have the X, Y, and Z impact on the world. So, as an entrepreneur, business goes up, business goes down. Am I a better
Mm.
entrepreneur who is better at achieving the goals of an entrepreneur? So, some of those goals are universal, which is, am I getting better at bringing together disparate resources and talents to better deliver? But also, as an entrepreneur, why am I being an entrepreneur? How do I want to leave the world different? Am I getting better at learning how to do that? So for me, it's important to transcend like a superficial plan A, even in the burn your boats and Greek warfare, right?
Mm.
The I think the key thing there is it's superficial to think, oh yeah, we just need to take over this island. That's not necessarily the only plan A. The planet, like real plan A, is let's make sure not just to win the battle for that island, but win the overall war. and
Yeah.
make sure that our society doesn't get fractured in the process. So transcending and landing on a bigger plan A, I think is truly critical.
Yeah. Super interesting, just resonating on everything that you shared. And I'm thinking back to those cobblestones in the West Village where you first called me. And for anyone listening, when Beri had the idea for what Ivy is today, he called me from these cobblestones in the West Village. And he still lives right nearby it. So he still often calls me from those same cobblestones. But what's very fascinating is Ivy has certainly changed massively over those 13 years, as you said. And if we talk about other organizations, your tactics, they're going to change. Fine. Everyone's comfortable with that. Your strategies, well, they're going to change too over time. They're going to evolve. And that, going back to Brad, that is the concept of order, disorder, reorder. You have to react to that change, and your strategies are going to adjust accordingly. Even the words within your mission statement might change, but the underlying values that led to the desire to build something, to create something, to produce impact, well, that's the plan A, in other words. And I think you articulated that really well, Beri. And you and Ivy serve as a really good example of that, because you are continuing to work towards that plan A. I'm really happy that now, I was on the sidelines, as a kind of spectator slash supporter. Now I'm in the trenches with you, and we're both working towards that plan A. And I don't see that plan A ever changing, because you hit the right note. It's like, this is the concept of falling in love with the problem. The plan A solves a problem that all humans, all groups of people, all organizations are always going to have: a desire for deeper connection. So as long as we're working on that, and we're every day getting better at that, regardless of our strategies, regardless of our tactics, regardless of what we actually do, as long as we're working towards that, it's going to be super powerful. And I encourage everybody listening to think about, well, what is your plan A? Like, really go one level deeper than you think, because the mission statement is unlikely to be plan A, because we all know that the words of mission statements will change. We've all been at consecutive offsites, and 1 year to the next, it's like, well, let's cross that out. Let's think of something else. You're at the whiteboard all the time. But there's something that's at the core that is that connective tissue. And maybe when that plan A doesn't exist, well, that's potentially where failure can occur, because, that's the glue that holds it all together. So really interesting ideas. I actually want to take the plan A and think about, what is my personal plan A, which I think I'm in the process of discovering now, but it's hard to put words on it. Hopefully through this podcast, maybe by episode, I don't know, 20, I'll be able to clearly articulate my plan A. But I think I'm getting there. Yeah. Did you want to add something? Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, I want to also say, so it's 13 plus years, right? But it was actually only last summer where I was on this, which I alluded to also in our last episode, with three really good friends. We were at a wellness retreat. And that's when it came to me, for example, that we were studying these four different archetypes of a visionary, uh, uh, healer, a warrior, and a teacher. And we were each assigned, there was four of us, we were each assigned an archetype, and I was assigned the archetype of teacher. And I was like, oh, come on, I'm more than a teacher. But actually, through the course of the wellness retreat, it became so apparent to me, like, wow, teacher, that is exactly what I wanted to do. But not any teacher, right? A teacher who, like Robin Williams and the Dead Poet Society, a teacher that gets people to dream bigger, take action, and fall in love with life, and you know the beauty of what it means to endeavor towards things. So I don't want the audience to get the wrong idea. It's like, oh, Beri, good for you. You always knew what you wanted to do, so maybe it's easier for you to
Yeah.
stick with things. It's not the case. I mean, I'm still discovering what Plan A fully is. What I do think, just to underline what Vidal said, what probably is unchanging is the problem that I really want to solve in the world, whether that's in a conversation I have one on one with someone, or whether that's, my impact on, people that I don't even know, whatever it may be. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? And I encourage everybody to double down and think about that. And of course, want to give a shout out to recent Ivy guest, Uri Levine, who wrote a whole book on fall in love with the problem, not the solution. You can check that out in our library, but he clarified that, I think, better than anyone that I've interviewed. So with that said, we're going to segue now to our third module of this episode, where we reflect on Annabelle Williams, world-renowned Paralympic gold medalist, five-time world record holder, stunt double for Charlize Theron, and her kind of focus area is all about unleashing your potential and transformative lessons from her life journey. So, what I'd love to do is, Vid, if you can share, of all the incredible wisdom Annabelle shared, what really stood out most for you, and we'll
Yeah.
go full speed from there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first off, I loved hearing Annabelle's voice again. We got to hang out with Annabelle in Monaco in June at the EY World Entrepreneur of the Year ceremony, where she was interviewing Toto and Susie Wolf. So it was great to have her and to have you speak to her. Beri, you know I'm obsessed with high performance athletes. And, I think there's probably a lot of people listening who love sports documentaries because elite athletes are kind of like the epitome of performance because they get tested constantly. And Annabelle talks about this anecdote of the fact that she was at the Beijing Paralympics. She was a world record holder. I think it was the 50-meter freestyle. There was all this expectation on her. And first of all, she said, coming to that point, while I had won multiple gold medals, while I was this world record holder, I'd actually been in thousands of races where I lost, because in elite sports, there's one winner and then there are, many losers. Not a nice word, right? But like in sports, there really is winners and losers, or winners and not winners. Let's put it that way. It's a better term. And in that particular race, she was the favorite. She's the world record holder. She comes to the finish and she sees she's 0.03 seconds down, and she hasn't won. In fact, she came fourth, which she says is the worst position. I always thought I thought second is the worst position, silver, because you're close to gold, but you're not quite there. Fourth must be terrible because you're not even on the podium. And maybe, yeah, bronze is all right. But anyway, I think everyone wants to go for that gold. What we learned from Annabelle from this is that, this relates to what Brad shared, what Matt shared. It's about, she said, failing spectacularly is required for growth. And I thought that's so fascinating because, okay, it's a bit cliche, right? Like we all grow, we kind of know this idea of like you grow through challenge, you grow through suffering, you grow through struggle. But those two words together, failing spectacularly and publicly, she said too, well, that sounds like a worst nightmare. That's nightmare fuel, especially for a lot of people who are high performers or want to be high performers. But what's so interesting for elite athletes is losing is as much part of the sport as winning is. And last week we talked about deliberate practice, and we were talking about our thought leader, Eduardo Brincero, who made a point that, sports is about winning and losing, and business is about making an impact. What I find interesting, though, from sports is you're tested constantly, and you have to go through the feeling of losing or failure all the time. And actually, so you get more stimulus. There's more of a feedback loop of the bad feeling of not winning, which pushes you even more strongly towards winning. And in business, while business is about making an impact, we have KPIs, we have a lot of different metrics to potentially measure that impact. But the true impact, the plan A impact, is always going to be a little bit more intangible. There is always a score sheet, maybe, and that's your balance sheet or your P&L. But whatever score sheet you go by, it's never exactly like a win or loss. There's never a race. You have bad weeks, you have good weeks, you have good years, you have bad years, but you never have like, okay, I came first. Even amongst your competitors, the journey keeps continuing. But what's interesting is, I think for me, sometimes it's not to put more pressure on myself, but I think pressure is good in many situations. It gets the best out of us. And athletes definitely deal with immense pressure. And Annabelle says that too. But I think it's really interesting in myself to create, and I think I do this subconsciously, so maybe it's about being a bit more deliberate about this, to create race situations or race days. And we can probably all reflect on times where this has been the case, where we've had that huge meeting or this pitch or presentation that's like, oh my God, this is my Monaco Grand Prix, this is my World Cup final. And if it goes well, it's like, yes, but then it's like, okay, I got the business. Now I have to deliver for this business. Like it doesn't end. It's not quite the same. So it never feels like I got the gold medal and like it's over. Because there's this constant cycle of increasing attainment and you know, the plan A, that's interesting for Matt. Like plan A is never achieved, I think is the point, right? Plan A is always, you strive for plan A at all times. Anyway, I love this. Annabelle had so much wisdom to share. This is what stuck out to me because I'm obsessed with high performance athletes, and she is one. She's an impressive individual, you know, outside of her athletic career. But this is what really stuck out to me. And you know what? The concept of failing spectacularly and publicly, yeah, that's the stuff of nightmares. But maybe that's what's required sometimes. Not to deliberately fail, obviously, but put yourself in a position. If you put yourself in a position to fail spectacularly, that means you've put yourself in a position to succeed even more spectacularly. But you know, as an old skiing coach told me, you know, if you don't fall 3 times a day when you're skiing, you're just not training hard enough. You know, if you're not falling, you're not on the edge. So do you want to be safe or do you want to live on the edge? Because that's what wins races in sport and maybe in business as well. Would love to hear what resonated with you. You're probably not going to nerd out quite as much as me on the elite athlete perspective, but maybe you will. Let's see.
Thanks, Vida. I definitely have been cultivating a greater and greater appreciation for elite athletic performance. You've always been more into sports and this topic than me, but you really have planted the seed in my head of looking at everything also from the perspective on elite performance. And the reality is, failing spectacularly, great phrase, but if we fail spectacularly and then we flame out and we just can't compete again, or we're in deep depression, or it causes massive harm to ourselves and others, and we can't get back up from it, that's not great. So even if it was a spectacular failure, we need to be able to keep going. And we already touched on this a little bit earlier, specifically what Annabelle said about this when she was in the changing room after getting that non-ideal outcome after coming fourth. She was sitting there in the changing room, pretty upset, to say the least. Another competitor came in and asked her, "Hey, Annabelle, is your family here with you?" And Annabelle was like, "Yeah, they're in the stands." And the lady said, do you know how lucky you are that your family can be here with you?" And the person who was talking to her, from what I recall, no longer had loved ones around her anymore. She had lost some loved ones. So what that reminded me of was the fact that this other competitor reminded Annabelle, "Hey, there's more than one room in your house.
Hmm.
One of the rooms in your house is a mess right now. You didn't achieve what you wanted to, but your family's here. And you have other things going on in your life as well." And if Annabelle's entire life was all about defined by whether or not she gets gold, that would have been potentially the end of the road for her. Yet, I would claim, despite her world record breaking performances and gold medals, I would say her career after
Hmm.
being an athlete has been as spectacular, if not more so. She's on TV. She inspires companies across the world. She interviewed Toto Wolff and Susie Wolff in Monaco, as you were mentioning, like, and it feels like she's just getting started. So that multidimensionality, I think, is critical, and it's a fantastic example of how important it is that while trying to get gold in one area, we don't, neglect all the other things in our life, because all those other things is what we have to give us the rest, recovery, and the recharge needed to bounce back out and give a shot at the next gold medal
Hmm.
attempt, whatever that may be. Another thing that Annabelle talked about, which is important, is what this person did, this competitor who came into the changing room and got her to see what she has in her family and what a thing that is to be celebrated, if in a moment of loss. It was a kindness that this person did for Annabelle. And one of the things that Annabelle is now renowned for is really helping organizations tap into that importance of kindness. And kindness, at a superficial level, you might think, oh, kind and nice, hey, there, pat on the back, everything's going to be okay. But actually, true kindness is telling someone what they need to hear, no matter how uncomfortable it is. True kindness is being there for somebody when it's incredibly awkward to be there for them. And that's what true kindness is. And can you imagine walking into a changing room with an athlete that has been working for years to do something and they just failed at it? And there's no one else there. And you go in there and you ask them about their family. It's super scary, but takes a tremendous kindness. And she helped me see that kindness and courage are so interrelated.
Mm.
And to be kind to others and to be kind to ourselves actually, it's not a weakness. It's actually an unbelievable courage requiring strength. It's really difficult to do. And I thought, wow, I got to be more kind to myself, to those around me. But that doesn't just mean be nice. It actually means transcend niceness. And to be truly kind is to really be there for somebody and, say the things that are hard to say, be there when it's hard to be there.
Yeah. I love that, Beri. And I think it's a really, really good segue to Jim Fielding. So maybe you introduce Jim, because I have a few thoughts to share about what you just said, and I'll bring Jim into the conversation.
Sounds good. So Jim Fielding, he's a mensch. He is an incredible human being. He's had extraordinary leadership roles across many of the most beloved media and retail brands in the whole world. Disney, Gap, 20th Century Fox. And he wrote this book called All Pride, No Ego. And he is an extraordinary person. So excited to hear, Vidal, what jumped out at you most on this one. And then we'll round out with the final interview
Yeah.
for this podcast from there.
Yeah. Well, so he used a phrase that I'd never heard before, but I suppose it is a framework that exists, but I love this phrase. So first, I'll just share a little anecdote. 3 weeks ago now, I was in Rome with my partner Gabby at our dear friends' wedding, and they asked us to give the friend speech at the ceremony. And Gabby introduced me to a concept called chosen families, which is what Jim also mentioned, this concept of chosen families and how important chosen family is. What's a chosen family? It's that non-family family that you surround yourself with, that are with you through thick and thin, that have the courage to tell you, or the courage and the kindness to tell you what you need to hear, which is sometimes not the thing necessarily that you want to hear, but it's the thing that you need to hear. So I love that he brought up this concept of chosen family, and he really emphasized the importance of chosen family in your life journey, in terms of having those folks that when you are not feeling at your best, that you're not feeling at your greatest, you have those individuals in your life who can really be there for you, but who can have the courage and kindness to really tell you what you need to hear. And the thing that really resonated from Jim, there's a lot there, but I was just thinking of myself. It resonated with a lot of the things that I've been thinking about and working on within my own self. And it's a phrase that I hear from many of my extended chosen families, I'd say, from my actual family to chosen close friends to further out to various kind of like friend groups and circles that I have. Something that I keep hearing on repeat is you have to be kinder to yourself. You have to be kinder to yourself. And I want to say like, okay, I know, thanks, I know, and then I always have this, but I have this potential. I have to reach my potential. I have to work hard. I'm just like, I'm not there. I'm underperforming, blah, blah, blah. Right. And I get into this cycle of being cruel to myself or not particularly kind to myself. And then I vacillate. I think like, well, if I'm too kind to myself, am I going to reach that homeostasis? Am I accepting plan B? right? Am I just accepting failure like Annabelle would have? Like, what if that competitor didn't come in and remind her that, you know, you have a family here, and you have to like move on from this failure? Um, so, you know, Jim just had one phrase. He was bullied a lot as a child. And he had this one phrase where he said his negative self talk within his mind, but also out loud, his negative self talk was much more damaging to him than any external bullying that he ever experienced. And you know, I think it's so interesting. We talked last week about how, you know, we put on, you know, we put on our best clothes, our best voice, and we show up as best as we can for those clients who we barely know. But sometimes for our friends and our family, you know, we take them more for granted, or we're easier to, you know, work up a temper, to show emotion, to show anger. But like for those external people who, you know, realistically aren't as important in your life, you know, you're on your best behavior. So I found this interesting because I think, like, you know, I had said last week, like, we're sometimes cruelest to ourselves. And this concept from Jim of being kind to ourselves, accepting ourselves, but really being kind of at the same time, you know, like the metaphorical, even within ourselves, that metaphorical competitor in the locker room that reminds us that, you know, there's other rooms in the house. You're still on your path to plan A. Like, plan A is not over. It's just a change of strategy. I think it's really important. And it really touched me. And I thought, well, Jim is just like, clearly just, you called, he's a mensch. He's just also just like a very kind and good and energizing soul. So I really appreciated all the learnings from Jim. And I encourage everybody to consider who are their chosen families. And I also encourage everyone, just a call to action, to try to hear themselves when they get into that space of negative self-talk. Because even the most optimistic person, they might be optimistic with, and I'm certainly guilty of this, I'm way more optimistic about everyone else's life than I am about my own. I'm very harsh with myself, and then I'm like crazy encouraging of everyone else, no matter how they feel. And I get a lot of pleasure out of that. And then weirdly, like, what's wrong with me? Sadistically, I punish myself. I'm cruel to myself. So it's an interesting balance. Encourage everyone to just think of that concept. And come back to the title of Jim's book: All Pride, No Ego. Be proud of yourself and temper that ego, because the negative self-talk comes from the ego, and sometimes the ego can be quite cruel to us.
When I was listening to Jim's journey and on that ego point, I found a trajectory that deeply resonated, because I feel like I've been having that evolution, that relationship with my ego and how it's been changing. And as I observe other people, I can almost see 0 to 10 where they may be on their journey. I'm certainly not a 10 out of 10 when it comes to sublimating my ego to truly focus on what matters, bringing the best out of other people and the problem I'm trying to solve, rather than how I'm being made to feel about something. So sometimes the ego gets a bad rep. So before, just preaching or coming across like I'm preaching that ego is bad. Ego is not bad. Ego is there to protect us, to keep us alive, to get us to survive. Ego is only bad when it's trying to keep us alive and help us survive when our survival is not at stake. And actually, we're completely overreacting and it's causing damage to everything that we care about. So one thing that had come up in another offline conversation with a friend of a friend, he was talking about, people have always had this desire to join hands and be all as one and sing kumbaya and like embrace each other and do good things. But then while some people were wanting that, other people were like, hey, everybody wake up. Our village is getting invaded by hoarders. We're going to get like pillaged. We need to get up. So that's been kind of like this battle between the consciousness and the expansive, like welcoming nature of humanity with the protective, defensive nature. And both are necessary. You don't want your village pillaged, but you also want to trade with other villages and thrive and have a successful exchange. So,
Yeah.
same thing is happening inside of our brains. Earlier in my career, when internally in a team meeting, I would propose an idea and someone would essentially, whether through their body language or in their words, say a bunch of things where they disagreed. What I would hear is, Beri, you suck. Your ideas suck. Everything is going to fail. That's not what they were saying. But that's how my body would just get, I would
Yeah.
just get like completely worked up, furious. I would say stuff and it would just descend into this negativity. And anyone who knows me, I'm quite positive as a person, that to say the least. Um, I've seen that the years of highs and lows and the crucible pan of entrepreneurship have been like kind of, not maybe quite gold yet, but certainly closer to gold than the lead, that the raw material I started with. I've been really, cultivating that ability without a choice. It just happens, I guess, if you live long enough and go through enough hardship, where like people can say stuff that would have triggered you in the past, but now you're kind of like, okay, what are we really trying to do here? Let's get beyond this. Now, obviously, I still get triggered and react negatively when I shouldn't. It happens much more with people closer to me than people who
Mm.
are more distant to me. But Jim also mentioned like all pride, no ego is kind of like get over yourself, get over, your feelings around things, really anchor yourself on what matters. And, this whole arc of this episode has continuously gone back to
Yeah.
this, common theme of what's plan A here? What's the problem to be solved? What's the mission? And what the next action you're going to take, the next thing you're going to say, how does it get you to stick to plan A rather than, protecting your fragile little ego that's getting all, hurt for no reason when, you're bigger than this. So it's not easy. He also talks a lot about, as you mentioned too, kindness, being kind to yourself when that's happening. It's also okay if you get triggered and you don't behave in the best way, just get back on track. If you get off track, just get back on track rather than like, torturing yourself,
Yeah.
and keep on moving. And creating also environments for that kind of high empathy is very critical as well. So, with that, we've got one final module that we covered this week, and this one is with Brendan Kane, and it's based on his book that's called Hook Points and How to Stand Out in a 3-Second World. He is a renowned digital marketing and attention expert, best-selling author. He's an interactive media strategist, and this book has done really very well. And I know that for many of us, we may think grabbing people's attention in 3 seconds, that's for silly influencers out there. I'm like a person of substance and like I have real value and so forth. Like I'm not even playing that game. Um, that would describe me and Vidal quite well, having that having that attitude.
How long is this
But
podcast right now? How was the first 10 seconds of this episode?
yeah. So we like to think this way, but the truth is, we don't get to choose the world that we live in. We don't get to choose how the neuroscience of our minds work. Right? The reality is, something either catches our attention or it doesn't. And if it doesn't catch our attention, we are never, ever, ever, ever going to engage with it. And we make those decisions in a split second, sometimes less than 3 seconds. So whether we like it or not, all of us need to get better at capturing attention. So whether that's with those that we're trying to, prospects whose attention we're trying to get, whether that's with existing folks that we serve, whether that's with our teams or with our families, if we're not getting their attention, then, not like then we're unable to make an impact on them. So it's really critical. And with that, I want to hear from you of all the things that Brendan shared, what you thought was most important. And I'll build on what you share and we'll wrap from there.
Yeah, there's so much to say on this, and I think Brendan shares harsh truths for those folks who, you know, want to be or claim to be or think that they're, above that and they're not as susceptible to those small triggers or those like attention grabbing things. The reality is like, I don't know, personally, my journey is I've recently gotten off Instagram, so maybe like once a week I'll open it and then I'll be like, "Oh my god, I got to close this," because I find myself getting drawn in. But we all have look, we all have our vices, and I don't want to call them vices because we get some stimulus that we need. So my vice, it's Reddit, it's YouTube. I get in there because they feed my interests. It's not so much like I don't subscribe to necessarily that like, oh, it's so damaging, echo chamber, etc. It's like this is where I learn, and I love learning. So these platforms that give me information about the things that I want to nerd out over, it's amazing. But like often on Reddit, there's like it's basically a meme. No one reads the articles. People only read the comments, which I always find very fascinating because well, actually, I'll relate this to an important point that Brendan makes. An important point that Brendan makes: grabbing your audience's attention. Well, that's only step one. Step two is keeping their attention, right? And so, while you might grab their attention in the first 3 seconds or the first 10 seconds, doesn't mean that your content is valuable. Doesn't mean that you've achieved whatever goal you've had. You also want to grab and retain that attention, right? So, like Reddit is a great example. Why do people read the comments? Because this is the same way of reading Twitter threads or replies and so on. It's a conversation, and we're always seeking the conversation because we don't know where it's going to go. Conversations are less predictable. And Brendan does say, if you tell your audience at the very outset the ending of the story, they're going to be like, cool, I can close this now because like I already know what's happening, right? So he was like, that's maybe good for grabbing attention, but it's not best for keeping attention. You have to use the hero's journey, build up some suspense, like the kind of plot arcs that we're used to from Hollywood movies or TV shows and so on. But I do find it interesting, this interactive town hall. And I think we're seeing so much movement now. And I want to reflect on some of this movement. If you look at ads, it's like the advertising agency arguably has always been the same. Maybe the concepts of hook point have always been there. Attention grabbing and attention keeping. But if you look at old ads, and I was in Atlanta last year, we went to the Coca-Cola Museum, and you see all these like old school Coca-Cola ads, and they're like long, basically essays, about the health benefits of Coca-Cola. It looks like an Economist article, right? But it's in an ad, and there's like a cool picture, and there's the happy people. Maybe that's like what grabs your attention, but the text keeps your attention. Now we're in this world of screens, quick stimuli, short form text, short form video. And that certainly grabs attention over like many interactions. So we swipe and swipe and swipe and swipe forever, but no individual piece of content is very long, therefore. So it has to like regurgitate its point so rapidly. What I'm encouraged to see is potentially a movement. I think if we look at ChatGPT and if we look at what we have done at Ivy, for anyone that's not on our platform, check out our app or log into our platform. We've recently rebuilt it to make it a lot more text-based than necessarily video and audio-based, which it was before. And I thought like that was maybe just a preference that we had, but I think there's an overall movement towards text, and ChatGPT and LLM models, natural language models, are the ultimate example of interaction over text. Many people now want to obviously communicate over text rather than phone calls and so on. So the world is moving back to a text-based direction, and maybe ads are going to be more text-based. But I think overall, I'm going to bring it back actually to our plan A. And I love that plan A is like permeated throughout this whole episode, that concept. But if we bring it back to our plan A and we think about what's like the real hook, like for me now, I'm going a little beyond Brendan. I think the real hook that really hooks people is a sense of connectivity. And that's what social media gives us. It's like connectivity, which also has the unpredictable nature of natural interactions with other human beings. And that is the unexpected. The reality is, if you read an Axios article, okay, your eyes can scan and see the like punchline right away. Great. Okay, now you know the punchline, but like, did you really interact with that piece of content? Were you moved by that piece of content? I don't know. I guess you learned. I guess the point was there. But when you read this epic long New Yorker article that takes you, an hour and a half to read, well, you're going on a journey, right? Like you're like, those authors are so good at taking you on this journey, but they're not hooking. I don't know if there's like, the hook is the journey. And I think the hook being the journey is really interesting. And they're always human stories. And I think this concept of connectivity, whether we're like asynchronous with those people or just reading that story, is so important. And we both nerded out this morning. We're both fans of Lex Friedman. Lex did the first ever metaverse interview with Mark Zuckerberg with this new technology that Meta's releasing, which is absolutely mind blowing. I mean, okay, you have to wear a big, heavy VR headset. We can imagine that in the future it won't be so big and heavy, but they're not in the same place, and yet they look photorealistic as if they're in the same room. And I just got so pumped for this because I think that is maybe gonna, this technology is gonna take us out of the 3 second world and back into the real world. And I don't want to sound like a anti technology or whatever. Like it's for me, it's more about, we've lost a lot of human interaction and connectivity over the changes. So the reordering doesn't feel so human to human anymore. But even if we're in separate rooms, I mean, we're talking to each other now across an ocean, and it feels like we're having a chat, two brothers. So I'm really excited for it to feel like you're sitting at the table that I'm sitting at now, no matter where we are. And that's going to be just transformative for teams. And I've gone a little bit beyond now what Brandon was talking about, but this is what it sparked in me, because I was less focused on marketing strategies and tactics for hooking audiences and more about like, well, what does this say about the world, about society, about how we behave? So interested to hear what you thought, Beri. And yeah, I maybe I didn't do Brandon justice. So I will say to everybody, if you're struggling with your marketing, if you're struggling with the ROI of your marketing, you really want to listen to Brendan, because he has extremely actionable advice, and it's probably going to change the way that you message. So that is important. But yeah, my mind just went straight to the bigger picture. And maybe I lost everyone's attention in this.
You're good. That was
Did
good.
I
That
get
was great.
everyone? I'm not sure.
That was great, Reed. So, building on that, two quick, very actionable things I want to share. One is when we think about capturing people's attention and getting them to do something, hopefully something positive that's good for them, well, we need to be solving for what is it that we want to help them do? What is a problem they have that we want to help them solve? Because every piece of content, every product, every service ideally helps someone get from A to B. Some of them maybe not, maybe it's not a
Hmm.
positive, maybe it's not good for them, but I would say a lot of it is, like for a lot of things, we just want things to be better. And that brings me to Maslow's hierarchy, back to Maslow's hierarchy. So according to Maslow, as we all learned in elementary or high school or college or at some point, we all want to survive. So food and shelter, if we don't have those things, and our health, like obviously, if we don't have those things, we just want those things. That it's really critical. But then once we have those things, connection, community, belonging becomes incredibly important. And then at the top of Maslow's hierarchy is what he called self-actualization. Some call it transcendence. Sounds really, out there, but it's becoming like all that we can be, or transcending our base needs to become something more. And even if we have food and shelter and some kind of community, we always want better. We want to be healthier. We want to be safer. We want to have better connections, and we want to be better at, achieving our plan A and transcending and self-actualizing. So combining those needs with what Brendan shared around how people engage with content and how they make decisions, what captures their attention, what gets them to take action. Brendan's company did this research on how people make decisions. So I'm going to share the specific stats he shared. So
Hmm.
according to him, 30% of people, the largest subset of the population, make their decisions on how to engage with content based on their feelings. So depending on how this content is making me feel, I'm going to decide whether to check it out, go deeper with it, engage more with it. So it's all about the emotions and the feelings for almost 1 out of 3 people. For 25% of people, it's all about fact-based decision making. Are the facts speaking to me? And based on factually what this content is about, that's if I'm going to decide whether to engage with it or not. And that's a quarter of, like 1 out of 4 people. But when you combine feelings and facts, you get to 55% of the population. So half the people out there in the world, if you can appeal to their feelings, if you can appeal to their search for facts, you'll cover quite a bit. But that's not all. 20% of people, when they engage with content, it's all about fun based. 10% of people, it's about reflection based. Does it help me understand and reflect on the world, and then, get like help me zoom out? And for 10% of people, it's values based. Can I believe this brand? Can I trust them? Are they committed to me? And the reality is, no one is just one or the other. And what Brandon really recommends is, there's, on the one hand, this is not what Brandon said, there's the whole thing of a phrase I learned recently: the riches are in the niches. Okay, I'd never heard this, but now I can't unhear it. So if you want to like make a big impact, if you want to get rich, focus on a niche. Like, be very, very focused. The issue is, though, on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and like whatever mass media, you want to, like, if you can't even capture someone's attention, they're not going to even hear from you. Even if you search by demographic, advertise by demographics, you still, the platforms don't let you advertise based on someone like fun or facts and so forth. This is just human wiring and how they engage with content. So I think it's really critical that when we're creating content to capture people's attention, that it has a nice balance of how much does this appeal to emotions, how much does this contain facts, get people to reflect, appeals to their values, is a little fun, like who doesn't like some fun, and trying our best to have that combined approach. But while we're trying to do all that, let's not forget Maslow's hierarchy. People have actual needs. And like, if you're just being entertaining, they could engage with your content. You can have 1 billion views. They may still not engage more deeply with you. Like, loved your ads, never buying that razor blade or whatever it was, right? Like, but then your chances of some people buying it is a lot higher if a ton more people engage with it. So even if you capture 1% of 1% of those people, it could be really good for your business. So I guess my key takeaway is, and business, and by the way, also not just what outside of business, to whatever it is that you really draw people's attention to, how can we really appeal to people's core needs, and how can we do it in a way that is more artistic and combines different colors from the palette of human receptivity, rather than just being like, here are the facts, this is what's going to make you, or hey, it's all emotions, I'm going to make you laugh and cry, but then there are no facts, and therefore maybe you won't engage any further. So having that mix, I think, is going to be critical. And that is my final thought on that final module. I want to conclude today's episode by asking you, Vidal, what's one thing maybe you didn't get to say, or reflecting on the whole conversation? What's your final call to action to the audience? And after you share yours, I'll quickly share mine, and we'll wrap for today.
I think we said it many times, but my call to action is the thing that we said many times. Think about your plan A. What is that plan A? Because it's probably not the first thing that comes to mind, and it's probably an exercise that you need to think about. We had a call to action last time about writing down the 100 things. This is similar. Think about your plan A. Maybe go talk to friends, family, your chosen family, your colleagues, whoever it may be, and ask them, well, what's your plan A? What's our plan A? There's so many plan A's, from the very micro to the very macro. Define that plan A, then embrace entropy, and don't ever be too rigid. Be rugged and flexible, as Brad said. And, try to not burn the boats. I don't know, maybe just like put them far away so it's not tempting to get on them. But I love this episode was so great, and this week in Ivy Modules was so great, because there's these very common threads. And obviously those common threads are because we're talking about humans, and humans share all the same incentives and struggles, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're always working our way up that pyramid towards self-actualization. I'm still working on it. I'll let you guys know if I'm ever at the top of that pyramid. But probably I'll be too transcended by that point to think about things like podcasts or anyone else. I'll just be, in Valhalla.
Or maybe at that point, all you'll care about is how you're impacting other people. It could go either way.
Yep.
And love those reflections, Vidal. My call to action, very simply, and I can say this with 100% conviction: whatever is your plan A to get from one point to another, whatever the outline of that looks for you, I know for a fact that you're going to get better from A to B to go from where you are to where you want to go. The more you learn about the world and about yourself, the deeper you connect with those around you and new people that come across your life. And the more you can take those learnings, take those connections, and translate them into behavior change in yourself, in your organization, and all those that you impact, the better you're going to do. Learning, connection, behavior change. I do believe those are the three ingredients for unleashing your full potential. I believe all the 5 interviews that we did, that we just reflected on this week, um, really help us to learn and hopefully uh, lead to some behavior change. Now, for that to happen, we need to obviously double down on the learning, double down on the connections and the behavior change. So, if any of what we said, of all the things that we shared, if there was 1 or 2 things that really hooked your attention, that you felt like, you know what, this is something I want to go deeper on, that's exactly why the Ivy app exists. You can just go check it out. Each of the 5 people we referred to, we hosted a full 60-minute conversation with them. We then took that conversation and split it into specific insights. Each insight is 2 to 3 minutes to dive deeper on. But between Vidal and I, we probably scratched 5% of the insights from each of the different interviews. So definitely encourage you to go deeper to learn more. But learning is just one step. From there, you have to deeply connect, or from my experience, you have to deeply connect with others around that learning. So discussing those learnings with your loved ones, with your teams, and then committing to some kind of a change. So take the learnings, discuss it with other people, reflect on it together, and then whoever you're discussing it with, make one small commitment. What are you going to change based on this learning? And then set a time and date at which you're going to come back and share what was my success and what was my blocker. This is what we do when we partner with teams on Ivy. We help them do this. And you can also do this completely on your own. Whenever you learn something new, share with someone, discuss it, commit to a change, and then make sure you keep each other supported and accountable for making that change. Absolutely love this episode. Vidal, I'm so happy we're doing this. Can't thank you enough. And our whole team for making this possible. And with that, I want to wish the audience also a great day, week ahead. I want to thank you also for engaging with this. We're all super busy. So the fact that you carved out time for this, it means a lot to us. And it would mean the most to us if you then share some of these learnings with your loved ones, with your colleagues, so that the chain reaction and the positivity travels onwards from here.
Amen. Amen. Very well said, Beri. This was super fun. I'll see you next week. Literally see you next week in person. But I'll see you on the pod next week as well. Thanks for listening, everyone. And yeah, chat soon. Ciao.
Ciao, everybody. Thank you. Till next time.